Yeah, so if you don't know who I am, my name is Marcus Coleman. I'm on the advisory board for the DLE. I'm also located out of the Berkshires. I work as a registered client service associate. This is the Culture Chat. The virtual Culture Chat has been going on for since the beginning of COVID. So we're 3 to 4 months in, and we had great conversations over those months. Just give you a little background on the DLE Culture Chat. It's a business-oriented open forum that examines changes and challenges in today's unpredictable workplace. It is held bi-weekly at noon Eastern on Fridays. It's approximately around 60-minute program that engages multiple perspectives through a moderated format that promotes respectful conversations and actionable takeaways. Designed for greater interactivity than a webinar. That's what I prefer. I hate webinars. The program unites accomplished professionals from various backgrounds. The ranges of topics is extensive and includes virtual collaboration, mentorship, workshop, workplace inclusiveness, career pivots, and dealing with toxic cultures. Today's topic. So I'm not sure if we have any newcomers, but just to go over a few of our ground rules. So we do utilize the chat a lot with our virtual events. So if you can type in the chat your name, your title, your company, and where you're joining us from. It's a great way for you to network and also for us to get to know who you are. Also, hopefully, um, you did take the 10-second poll. The 10-second poll is: are you going to participate in the upcoming election? Like Linda said earlier, don't tell us who you're voting for. Just let us know if you're going to participate in the vote in November. Also, hopefully you saw in the Eventbrite and prior correspondence around this event, there was a Harvard Business Review article provided in advance for this reading, in advance of this culture chat. It's a great article, short read. If you didn't read it before, I definitely suggest you read it afterwards. So I'm gonna pass it on to our discussion leaders for today's session. We have a powerhouse panel ranging from different industries, different ages, different backgrounds. So I want to start off with Aaliyah. Aaliyah, can you give a brief introduction to yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. Some of you know me. I'm Aaliyah Marrow. I play professional tennis. I am in Durham, North Carolina. And let's see, today we are talking about toxic culture. My toxic culture, spoke to them earlier, might be a little bit different, but it can relate to everybody. Dealing with toxic culture, being an athlete, if you have a coach per se who is toxic, it can definitely affect your performance. And in fact, I've had a coach who has been toxic before, and it does affect your performance. You're not going out focusing on what you really should be focusing on. You have this strain on your mental with your relationship with your coach and what you're really supposed to be focusing on. And you can really take that with anything. Going into work, you're supposed to be working on a project, but you got this boss that's on you in a very toxic way. And so how I dealt with it, thankfully I had a really good support system to help me deal with it. But first things first, I would say write down the things that are being done. You know, you write it down from a legal perspective, possibly just to protect yourself or whatever it is. But if it is too much, you definitely want to say, you want to take the opportunity to say, if it's not you and the coach does not get better through communication and you're saying like, I don't agree with this, or this is something we need to work through, then you may need to look for parting ways with that coach or with that person. Now, it's not as easy maybe in certain businesses. I know with athletes, it can be kind of a tough time too because it takes a while to get another coach as well. So you have to really measure like the time of year you're willing to say like, okay, I need to walk away. Is it in your best interest to walk away from a toxic situation or not? And so I know one time professionally when I walked away, it didn't end too well. I actually took my bags and I walked off the court. But I just couldn't. I really couldn't. It's a little bit different being an athlete. It's not like you could just take your stuff and walk away from the office. But it was really that bad. And as far as, but we made up, and just as far as like, this just didn't work for us. Communication was almost a big language barrier as well. So I just figured this isn't going to work for me, because when I'm not happy doing what I actually love doing. And so then I felt like, okay, it's best to walk away in this situation.
Well, I want to hop in before I
Sorry.
want to hop in before we move on to the next person, Crystal. Cheryl, not to put you on the spot, but I know you're a newcomer, so thank you for joining us. If you can, there is a 10-second poll inside the chat. Chat functions at the top right, and it's a question on: are you going to participate in this upcoming election? Don't tell us who you're voting for. We just want to know if you're going to participate, and also for us to get to know you. Just put down your name, your title, the firm you're joining us from, and then where you calling in from, and that'll be awesome. And once again, welcome to the DLE community, and thank you for joining us. Crystal?
So Crystal just asked a question in the chat. She said she was just going to ask about the outcome of separating from that toxic coach and what happened after. So after, it was just basically a sit down with my parents, aka my managers, for the most part, and my coach. And it's just like, this wasn't exactly how we wanted it to be. Made sure we gave them the last paycheck, as far as, because there are contracts as far as, how many paychecks you will get. I had no problem with that. It's just a matter of, okay, I need to move forward and know what to look for into the next coach, as far as, okay, you can't talk to me this type of way, or, it's different as you get older and as you move on. There's certain ways. There's a lot of, I don't know how to explain, but in the athletic sense, or in the athletic realm, there's a lot of toughness that goes with it. But sometimes toughness is borderline abuse. And so you have to be able to distinguish the difference. Is it toughness or is it abuse? You can't talk to someone like they aren't human. There's a way to make someone mentally tough, or there's a way to make someone challenge them without abusing them. And so, thoughts. Toughness is borderline abuse. Thoughts on that comment? Oh, okay, sorry. But yes, so you want to make sure that you do distinguish that. Some people go into situations thinking, oh, well, this is just the culture, and they allow things to go on too long. And in fact, that can put a strain on you mentally and emotionally. And it could go on past when you leave that person or leave that company. It could really affect you mentally or emotionally for a long time. So you want to make sure you're in a situation where it's like, is this competitive, challenging, or is this abuse? And is this wrong? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that is so true. That the separation between tough love and coaching and harassment.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, a simple one to do in the workplace, just to correlate it from taking it from sports to the workplace. You have protected categories. So protected categories is someone talks about your sexual orientation,
Mm-hmm.
your religion,
Mm-hmm.
your racial background. I can't remember the other two, but these are things that, okay, it crossed the line, and this is harassment. And advice: go to your HR department if you don't want to make a big fuss, because you'll
Right.
be surprised. Maybe that manager or colleague has multiple complaints already, and you're helping um, keep the culture that the company wants and eliminating people that don't align with that company's culture. Um,
Exactly.
I mean, the next person I would love to hear from is Crystal. Um, she's in the engineering industry. She has a crazy background, highly educated. I'm pretty sure she had different experiences of establishing a great culture and also experiences with a toxic culture.
Sure, Marcus. Thanks. I'm actually really lucky because I mean, at General Dynamics, I feel like I'm in a really good situation. You know, I've always felt really well supported. I felt like the culture is very welcoming and looking for people to be engaged. At work right now, I've never felt like that has been an issue. And I felt like I've been able to positively impact the culture with some of the groups that I'm a part of or some of the opportunities that I've had, which is really important to me. That's something that I really enjoy. But one example I really thought of when it comes to toxic culture is actually in my volunteering. I volunteer as the chapter advisor for my sorority, Gamma Phi Beta, back at my college. So it's a chapter of, it's about 80 women right now, and they're led by an executive board, a president, and 6 vice presidents. And that changes every single year. So you've got collegiate leaders that have a 1-year term in their position. And I work with them as their chapter advisor to try to help grow them as leaders and ensure that, you know, not only they're following policies, but that they're growing and they're leading the chapter well. And one thing that happened this year, the exec board is finishing up their term at the end of this semester, and 3 of them on the exec board are very close friends. The other 3 very close friends, and one's kind of in the middle. There's been a lot of kind of talking about each other, these 2 groups of 3, kind of, you know, communicating behind the other's backs. They have like individual group chats. And since most things are happening virtually, they're doing a lot of like text groups, right? So one situation that happened is the president actually sent a message that was meant for her small group of 3, kind of that close group that she has been venting to, I'll say, and messaged something about the other 3 in a larger chat that was not meant for the entire group. So of course the people that she had been talking about got that message. The president reached out directly to me and said, I made a mistake, what do I do? And her and I kind of had to work through repairing the relationship. We're still working through repairing the relationship. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and really we facilitated a conversation. I helped them facilitate a conversation about, you know, what's been happening with this group. Where are those toxic moments that are happening, you know, these conversations behind each other's back instead of welcoming the whole group into the conversation, making decisions in smaller groups rather than together as a team. A lot of those things that were happening, we had to kind of talk through and decide, you know, what do we do? How do we repair the relationship? How do we make sure that we can get through this? Because, you know, for them, yes, they could leave their position, but we talked through and hoped that everyone would stay and would choose to recommit and continue to be a part of the group. And they did. Some were definitely more hurt and upset than others, and it was a very difficult conversation to facilitate because of all the emotions involved. But it did kind of create a little bit of a toxic culture within that group. And it's something that we've all chosen to stay and work together and continue to rebuild the trust. So that was one example that I thought of.
It looks like Linda asked you, how do your actions affect an outcome?
How do my actions affect the
Yeah,
outcome?
how did your actions affect an outcome? Yes.
I think for me as advisor, just being able to be there for them and kind of be that party that isn't emotionally invested in that individual conversation and that piece of it, who could ask them questions, who could push them a little bit to be vulnerable with each other and talk through how they were feeling and what was happening. I think they probably needed that outside party to help them with that conversation, because it can be really challenging for the president, who is now not in the greatest light with all the rest of them trying to facilitate that. I don't think that would have gone well. So I think I was able to help just in that aspect.
That, I mean, Crystal, the scenario you explained, that's a tough one, because we naturally are drawn to people that are similar to ourselves, and when you make in groups and you people outside the group, it makes it extremely difficult to communicate as well as to get things done. And it's a lot of times we don't do it with maliciously by just getting around people that are similar to yourself, but especially in a work environment, don't allow yourself to associate with people and then gossip about others, because that's when it can go down a slippery slope, and you never know, that person might get promoted as a manager in the future, and that's the influence in your career. Um,
It also speaks to the virtual environment that we're in now too, because if they were having more conversations in person rather than, via text message or via group chats, this may not have happened, or may have happened differently. So there's definitely some changes with that as well.
and so, Caleb, you just did a pretty long post in the chat, so I want to give you the mic right now.
Sure. So, hey, I'm Khaled. I'm in Boston. I am in the finance industry. I've been in the industry for over 10 years now. I know I look young, so it's a little deceiving, but but I did put a long post because I do feel really strongly about this, about toxic culture. Because I'm always the one to try to help and address people. And disclaimer, I'm very direct with people, respectful but direct. And the example I thought of, I've not only been in one but multiple. Like I'm sure everybody has been in multiple situations where they've been toxic. But the one I want to refer to kind of ties it back to competition, but more in the corporate financial advising environment. I'm an advisor, so the way that my company is set up, we have colleagues, but we are competing against those colleagues for the same kind of business in advising people. But we try to respect each other's boundaries, each other's lines, and target markets and situations of the like. There was an occasion where I was prospecting a client. I gave my pitch. Everything went great. And then a day or two later, I don't know what the timeline was, but it's very closely afterwards, I hear my colleague behind me to my left talk to the same client. I don't know how he found his number and their number. And they talked to the same client. I can hear it because he had him on speakerphone, and he offered the same services, maybe not the same client service level as I would have offered, but the same services at a lower fee. Which is that, undercutting somebody like that is like, okay, I know that like it's a competitive environment, we're competing for the same business, we work for the same company in the end. It's like, what are we trying to do? And things like that, like if you let them kind of go and happen, they can snowball into a very toxic situation, and you feel like it's going to impact your self-esteem to a certain degree. The way I dealt with the situation, I went to the advisor directly and I asked him to talk, and I prefaced it. I was like, "This is going to be a hard conversation, maybe for you, maybe for me, maybe for both of us, but I wanted to tell you some thoughts on what I see. Can you please clarify what happened?" I try to give them the benefit of the doubt to explain themselves, and I addressed it. To make a long story short, I addressed it. I was like, if you ever do this again, like I'm gonna take it over to the executive director, because the advisor felt he did nothing wrong. He felt that it was, this is completely, fair, it's competition, it's whatever. And sure, from a industry perspective, like he was not my client. It is what it is. From a toxic culture perspective, from a moral perspective, that is wrong. And I like to build and create teams and lead teams, and that's just not the way you do it. And sure enough, a few months later, that client ended up coming over to me, eventually agreeing to a higher fee. So sometimes you have to address the issue head on, and to tie into my long post I put in the chat. You have to, there's a level of accountability you need to be aware of, whether you're the one being toxic or people are being toxic toward you. It's always a two-way street on how you react to it or respond to it. And, it's scary. Like that talk I had with that advisor, I was nervous. I was anxious before then, and how to prepare for it. I prepare my thoughts and just to make sure we had it. A good conversation. And even though the outcome ended up being more, let's say combative, probably the right word, because the others didn't see the point, which is fine, I guess. you have to stick to what you believe in and how you are. I think Kirsten earlier said that she had to walk away from the job earlier, because of a job that she tried to address it with her boss, and that's kind of how I feel about it too. She said it in the chat. I was reading the chat. She, you have to address it, as scary as it may be, or if, first of all, that if you even want to address it. If you don't and just want to get out of it, then just do that. Right? Don't waste your time and your emotional energy to do that. But if you want to make it work, get into it. It's scary, but anything worth doing is going to be scary and hard. Try it. And if you tried and your intentions were good and nothing comes out of it, whether it's through an HR department or directly with the person that you feel is creating the environment or people, then your intentions were pure. You tried your best. They're losing you. You tried. Move on. And I know it's easier said than done, but we have a community like this. We want to help each other out and have these conversations. So that's one example in the financial industry. I have more, but I'll open up the floor. I have one later on where I did move on from my company, but I just want to not take up anybody's time. Yeah.
And you brought up a great point. In different industries, there's a different level of competitiveness, right? And where do you separate a toxic culture from being competitive, especially in something like sales? I mean, that's extremely difficult. I mean, I was in sales myself, and when you put in competition and money together in an environment, you can bring the best and worst out of people. And that, but I mean, I would love to hear from someone that has an HR background, that's currently in HR. So if anyone's on here right now that's in HR, I would love to hear your insights on a toxic culture.
I'm in HR. I'm an HR generalist at Greylock Federal Credit Union. I've been in HR at Greylock for about 3 years now. I have a little HR background beforehand. And the approach I take with my life, my personal life, my professional life, if your HR department has some sort of, if politics play into anything that's going on at work and they don't if you think they're not taking what you're saying seriously, I think you really have to take a look at your company as a whole and see if it's not changing now, it's not going to change in the future until something big happens in the company. We have 300 employees. I have employees that I have been friends with before I worked at Greylock, and I have people I've become friends with while I've been working at Greylock in HR. And I can separate myself from those relationships when I have to handle a situation that's going on. It's my job. It's nothing personal. And I really take it, everything as professionally as I can be. When you're coming into a situation where, you're coming to know of a toxic culture, and the other thing is on the other end, if you're the employee who came to HR or their manager about what happened and you feel like they're not doing enough at that time or they're not doing anything, you just may not know what they're doing behind the scenes because they don't want to draw a bigger crowd to what's happening or make a big deal out of it. It is still a workplace that they're trying to maintain some sort of, work happening at the workplace. But for the all too common of a one person HR department where that one person in the HR department is doing payroll and benefits and everything else, I feel for that person. I couldn't do my job without my HR or my benefits person and my payroll person. I am primarily the person who does the employee relations stuff. And I can't stress enough to trust your HR department. And if you don't trust your HR department, then I don't know if you can trust your company either. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, does anyone have questions for Nicole? I mean, it's a great opportunity.
So Nicole, I think it was Kirsten that said she had an issue, if we go scroll back in that chat, that a lot of companies, a lot of people are in companies that don't have a structured HR organization, and the HR actually is the owner maybe, or the president. So how do you guide someone in that sort of a scenario?
So I think it was Aaliyah who earlier said documentation, and if you can document and keep documentation of what had been going on, that's going to help you in the long run. If the situation, if it's a small company that you're working at and the owner is who everybody reports to, things are probably not going to change, and either, I hate saying it this way, but you're either going to have to deal with it and move on and get over it, or eventually something's going to come to a head where you are going to find your way out. And whether that's you found it by yourself or found a different way out, you may want to end up, you know, some people go the route of it was a hostile work environment. Don't forget that term, because if anybody makes a hostile work environment for you, you may end up having a case on your hands. So documentation in those instances will help you if it goes that route of having to go to court, or even looking for unemployment. If they try to contest your unemployment, if you have documentation and you can stand up for yourself for it, then it could help you there too.
Yeah, that is always great advice. Documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I want to do something a little bit interactive right now. Just have a simple question. Has anyone on this call experienced a toxic culture where they had to leave the firm? I know, Kirsten, you already mentioned that. So I see Danielle, Khaled, Kaylee, Jonathan. Well, Jonathan, I would love to hear from you. I mean, you were our special guest the other week, and we love to have you. You gave us a lot of great insight. So, when you join us, can you just please say your name, your title, your company, and where you're joining us from?
Yeah, so my name is Jonathan Meldrum. I participated in the DLE in 2010 when Linda was putting it together. It was still kind of in its infancy. I am currently in Boise, Idaho, and I am the program director for a company called North Point Recovery, which gives inpatient and outpatient treatment to drug and alcohol, or people struggling with drug and alcohol addictions and co-occurring disorders. So, yeah, so as far as toxic environment, so prior to me coming into this this career field, I worked in corrections for the Idaho Department of Corrections in Idaho, and that's what I like to refer as kind of like a good old boy kind of club. And they weren't big on newer ways of thinking. And for me, when I came into the field of law enforcement, you know, just graduated college and was super eager and super excited about, you know, just the experience overall. And I could tell personally, well, hindsight looking at it, I could tell that probably I stopped getting, I wasn't happy with the career probably about 4 months into it. Now, fast forward 8 years later, I was still within the company, and I promoted pretty high up within the state. But with the toxic environment, it was a lot of people out to get one another. If you were in a position of rank, or if you had a higher position than somebody else, they could slander your name and, you know, start rumors and get you demoted and things like that. And you know, now within my career, I have pretty firm and set boundaries about what I allow and what I don't allow within my personal life and my professional life. With my professional life, I've really fostered this positive environment because I think I'm a former athlete, and for me, the best success that I have ever had within athletics and you know, anything I've done is when a team is cohesive and people are getting along, and there is a good open line of assertive communication. When I was working in the prison, you just didn't have that. And I found that if I was toxic, if I was surrounded by toxic people, it affected so many areas, not only my professional life, but also my personal life. And probably one of the hardest decisions I ever made was calling it quits and kind of giving up a career that I had set to, you know, have for the rest of my life. And I had goals that I wanted to do that, but I really had to come up with an idea of whether or not I wanted to be stuck in a career and be miserable. And I could see that in people that had been in the career field for, you know, 20 plus years. They were just miserable people. They were unhealthy, they were unhappy, just everything about them screamed what I didn't want to be. And so when I finally made the decision to leave, I remember just feeling like this great weight off my shoulders. And I was really careful when I started looking into new fields and a new company to work for. What did that company have to offer to me that was going to benefit me and make me better professionally and personally? And the company where I'm at now, they foster everything based off of core values. We have 4 core values that we live by, and you don't get hired if you don't fit into these core values. It's just kind of plain and simple. And they're humble, inspired, conviction, and integrity. And so when I'm interviewing, and I work really close with the HR department and hiring new staff, if there's any question for that, they just don't come on. And I do that not to be, you know, I want my team to be successful, and I don't want to bring somebody in that's going to be toxic, you know, and I have to keep it really in check, because since I'm a program director and I oversee a large amount of staff, if I ever get into, you know, kind of a toxic mindset, that trickles down to every single one of my employees. And what ends up happening is, you know, my patients are affected, my staff are affected, and then I'm not getting the best result for my team, even if I come in one day in a toxic mindset. So my biggest thing is, if you're ever in a situation where you're in a toxic environment, I completely agree with Nicole, like, you have to really check and see if the company is right for you. And when you're coming into new companies and new organizations, I always encourage people to ask questions of what that company brings, as far as, you know, how do you address toxic behaviors within the workplace? How do you avoid those things? You know, if it does happen, what are the actions that take place in that? Because everybody that works deserves that, you know, enjoy what they do and have fun. And I think Marcus said it best earlier, you know, there's a fine line between being competitive and being toxic, right? I work in a very competitive field, and people are always trying to exceed, but nobody steps on anybody else to get where they need to be. And that's a big thing. Can you work as a team and also build each other up, or are you going to tear each other down to try to get where you're at?
And Jonathan, I mean, that's a lot of strength on your part. I mean, especially to have a career that you can see yourself being in for the rest of your life. You were successful in it. You got promoted to a high level, and then take a step back and say, I don't know if I will allow this to affect my personal life. That's a big step, especially when you've seen success in any type of career, to step away from it. I'm looking at the chat, and it is going crazy right now. Cheryl, you asked a great question. How do you set boundaries when you deal with someone who micromanages, which can contribute to a toxic environment? I'll leave that to someone else to answer. I'm not that versed in that. I never really experienced that. But if someone else experienced that and has some advice, please share. Danielle?
Oh, it's funny that you say that, Cheryl. My very first job out of college, I had a micromanager as a manager. I will tell you 2 things about him. One, he made me an incredible professional email writer. And to this day, I use that. However, he made me stressed beyond belief, right? Because I had to copy him on every email, on every document. He would call me if there was an extra space in my Excel document. He would go through every single one of my office with like the paragraph and see all the spaces and things. So it was stressful, right? Because how do you deal with that? How do you go to your job every day? You know that you're really good and proficient in these things, but everything about you is being challenged all the time, right? So that was really tough. And again, while it was a tough environment, it also made me stronger, because I learned all these different things that I never would have learned had I not been in that experience. So definitely a positive from there. But how did I handle it? So he would call me at 4:29, I'd leave at 4:30. And I had an hour and a half drive home. But when he called me at 4:29, I had a 3-hour drive home. And so how do you kind of go back and really say like, hey, listen, this is affecting me. And I remember one night I turned to him, I said, listen, I will work overtime if you want me to work overtime, but you need to prepare me for overtime. I come in at 7:30 in the morning. I leave my house at 6 a.m. and I'm not getting home now until 8 o'clock because you have me on the phone. And while I appreciate doing this work for you, I really need you to understand that my personal life is being affected here. And if you need something from me, let me know by 3:30 so I can wrap it up and get it out the door by 4:30. And that helped a little bit, kind of, again, that level setting. We also had weekly meetings. Sometimes it was twice a week, sometimes it was once a week. Here are the things I'm working on. Here's my status. So it was a constant check-in without the ability to constantly be on, right? He'd come to my desk every half hour. Hey, what are you doing? Hey, what are you working on? Well, we just talked about it an hour ago. It's not really changing. How about we meet in the morning, or let's meet at this time in the day? So trying to set your own boundaries of what's okay for your interruptions was definitely a lifesaver on that. But once I did say that conversation of, hey, you're really keeping me from getting home in a reasonable hour, and here's why, and this is how you can work with me, it did change. And I will tell you that was the very last time he called me at 4:29. And we started having a more positive working relationship for the remainder of the time that I was there. I personally didn't care for that type of work environment, so I decided to leave. But after it did start to get better, I just realized, hey, not only is this culture I'm not happy in it, there's not a lot of growth at this company. So that was the ultimate reason that I decided to leave and come back to the Berkshires, actually. But it was generally, it was a hard experience, but I'm glad that I had it and I learned a lot from it.
Can I add to that real quick, Danielle, if you don't mind? Yeah, I mean, you brought up a really good point about, like, when you decided to leave, I think, the company, I thought about this right away because I was in a similar situation. And, for me, it was sometimes like you feel that there's growth in the company once you address the toxic environment, because the toxic environment drags you down so much that you feel like, oh, once this is done, it'll be all good. It'll be, sunny and flowers. I'm going to frolic in the field. And it takes away from the focus of, like, am I growing in my career? Am I bringing value to the company and myself? So it takes a lot of self-awareness, to do that. And it takes work. And I mean, the way I did it before, it just write down, like, literally a piece of paper, then in the middle, pros and cons. Like, it sounds very trivial. It sounds kind of, like, really that works? Absolutely it does, Do what you need to do, to figure out what you want and what environment you're in. And, also, like, don't be afraid to show a little bit of your personality. When I dealt with micromanagers before, like, I deal with a lot of things, if not all of them, with humor. I'm always joking around. I'm trying to keep things lighthearted. And I have done that before with a micromanager before, going like, well, you don't trust me? And, like, joke with them that way, And that at least makes them aware, because I found, in my experience at least, many micromanagers don't know they're micromanaging. They're not aware of it. If they are aware of it, then it's just toxic in general, easy, black and white, get out of there. But if they're not aware of it, you just need to bring that awareness. And I love the way you did it with the conversation. You did it going like, hey, listen, personal life, what's going on? That was awesome. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad I got to share that experience with everybody. I hope it helped you, Cheryl, with your question.
I will just say, like, this is more of my more recent job. So I wasn't fresh out of school. It was actually very disrespectful and demeaning. And I've made it very clear to her, like, I'm in a senior role. You don't need to question every single one of my everything that I do. You hired me for a reason. Number two, I set very clear boundaries as to when I take lunch, and I block it out in my calendar. She will see it, and she will still schedule something right within that time slot. And sometimes I just said, nope, I'm not available. One time she did tell me that I expect you to burn the midnight oil, and I said I owe you nothing more than 5 o'clock. I just think like maybe the way I communicated maybe is not the best, but it's something that has built up over a long time, where you set boundaries and people just continue to push what it is that they can get away with, and then they still contribute to that toxic environment, and then they pull the "I'm your boss" card, right? So I would say it's they're like I'm very good at setting boundaries. I just need people to respect it, and when you don't, I kind of get like very upset, and rightfully so, right? And I just think, oh, and it's my current job. But the reason why I'm still here is because she left. I was actually like a foot out the door when all of this was going down, and leadership knew, HR knew, and what was frustrating is that they did nothing about it. So even though she's no longer here at the moment right now, I just feel like there's no level of trust that exists between myself and the company, which still contributes to a toxic environment because I don't feel like, oh, let me go talk to HR, or hey, maybe they're looking out for my best interest, which is not the case. Well, the way I feel, that's not the case. So overall, to me, like it's a toxic environment for sure, even though my immediate manager is no longer here.
Hey, Cheryl, I have a question. It's Linda. Has this changed since going remote? I'm not presuming, first of all, I don't know when this relationship started at your work environment, but has going remote affected this in a different way? And I'd like to pose that actually out to the group at large in terms of how virtual has either created more opportunity for a toxic culture, or maybe it's mitigated, or what's been the impact?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely helped with, like, I don't feel like I'm being micromanaged and like, okay, what are you doing? As long as everyone has tasks, everyone knows what they are, and then it's up to you to deliver on them, which works a lot better for me with my now new boss. So I've been in this job maybe a little over a year. I was working with my prior manager only for 6 months. I was honestly out the door in 6 months. Like that's really where I was with it. And as of right now, it's probably been like 9 months now. Sorry, a little over a year since I've been here.
Yeah, that was, I mean, Danielle, that's a great story. Someone micromanaging, and I mean, I've never been micromanaged to the degree like you have, but being in sales, I have experience working with people that want you to CC them on every email possible, and language in sales is very subjective. And I mean, I invested in Grammarly just because of that. I had a senior colleague that was extremely nice way to put it, detail oriented, negative way, very anal. Um, and a lot of times it took away from me being very creative. So to know that I can be creative and had a backstop like Grammarly to make sure the grammar was there, even when I'm trying something different in language, it it helped me out with that relationship and release some of that micromanaging that he was doing. And then Cheryl, I mean, that's a tough one. Like you did like what people mentioned in the chat, you got to set boundaries. But when you're setting boundaries, one of the biggest thing in communication is what you say, how you say it, your body language. So you even mentioned it potentially because it was built up. You had a little bit of emotional behind it. You might didn't express it the way that you wanted to, but you did the first right step. But you learn from it. You realize that potentially I could have communicated that better. So in the future, if you experience that, you'll be able to handle it differently. And then when you become a manager and you have a group of people following you, you can teach them the right way to communicate setting boundaries. Um, Someone I want to get to is Maple. I feel like Maple, you might have a unique view on this, just from cultural differences. Maple, do you want to share potentially if you had a toxic culture in the past or any insights into this conversation?
Yeah. So one thing I find it very interesting because since my investment banking background and plus here all the investment background, so we have an unspoken rule that nobody will stab each other's back during the year-end review process. Because the reason why is it's kind of sounded bad, but it's you don't want to give the HR the reason to give you less bonus, allocate the team less bonus. But the rationale behind it was um, usually there's problem people within the team, they work it out and everybody address the problem throughout the year, not wait till the end of the year. So since finance, I mean, at least my experience in banking, it's such a team oriented experience and everybody works so closely together within a team. And if somebody really saving a comment till the end of the year review, that also expose there's some underlying issues within the team. And so I think throughout our review process is very robust. We have peer review and each level has to review each other, and also the junior has to review the senior team. So I think just because this all process, everybody learn how to work together collaboratively, and also we constantly getting comments and the same thing with Grammarly, and because I'm not a native speaker, I miss a lot of articles in my sentence, BA and all that kind of stuff. And I'll keep getting feedbacks from my manager and just telling me this grammatic issues and encourage me to invest in like software like this to fix the problem throughout the way. So in the end, I won't get a bad review technically, but I like the system, and it's not only creating a very encouraging culture, and also help everybody grow throughout the way, and not just you find a surprise in the end.
Yeah, that's big that you mentioned the team environment. So potentially you're in the industry, and I think I'm assuming, but most industries, I think it has a lot of collaboration. I never worked in investment banking, but I mean, you guys work with numbers, really big deals, so you guys got to be able to communicate really well, because you can make a big error and really impact the reputation of the firm you work for. Um, and also, I mean, that was something interesting that you brought up too as well. I mean, English is not your native um, language, and I mean, you're in investment banking. You're not out here writing articles for the New York Times, but still, the communication that you did have that you had to write up, someone noticed that, hey, there's some opportunities for you to improve. And English is my native language. I still invested in Grammarly because you're getting a ton of emails. You're trying to write them out fast. You can easily forget an article. You can easily do an autocorrect that puts something totally different in there that changes the entire conversation and makes you look incompetent. But I love that in your current firm that you guys work it out. Um, I want to make this interactive again because it is 12:52. So at this point, just want to mention that we do have a soft stop at 1 p.m. I know people have a pretty busy schedule, but if you want to stay on after 1 p.m. and have more of a free flowing conversation, I will stay on, Linda, as well as others. Please do. We want to get to know some of the new people. And also, if you've been there 1,000 times, we love to see how your week's been at work and personally. Um, and the last question before we close out. Oh, let me bring it. And Nicole, can you drop um, the link to give us for everyone to give us feedback. So we really drive on feedback. It helps us curate future virtual events such as the Culture Chat, Breakfast Club. If you're new, we have our Breakfast Club bi-weekly as well, 7 a.m. Eastern. Please join us. We usually do like a skill swap, working on networking, or it might be free flowing, just to have you be able to network with different people in this COVID reality where we can't meet up with people in person. And also, I'm going to pass off to Linda to give some closing remarks before I ask the last question. Linda?
I want to just pick up what Marcus just said. The next Breakfast Club, by the way, it's next Friday and it's at 7 a.m. And we're always looking at skills that folks want to keep sharpening. And we're going to be focused on the power of storytelling and how to tell a great story. A lot of our members are saying they want their communication skills improvement, and storytelling is an art. And some of you may know Dana Altman. She's come to become one of our regulars on Breakfast Club. She just published her second book, and she's going to spend some time in the Skill Sharpener session really talking about the art of storytelling. And then the last program that we have this month is I'm excited about because it's looking at inner bias in a way that I don't think we've been inspecting enough. And that is the impact of how going remote has been affecting our inner bias. So we have a workshop, our ownership workshop is on the 28th with Dr. Andrea Line. And that's a topic that I had posed about the impact of remote on culture. I can't study enough about what virtual is doing to us in all the dynamics of our work life and our workplace. So please join in that. And I did want to let folks know we are going to migrate to Zoom at the end of the month. Actually, we're going to probably make the switch before the end of the month. And Evan was saying that I know for some organizations, GoToMeeting isn't necessarily recognized by their platform, so hopefully that also helps. It's also going to enable us to do some quick breakouts during sessions, which I know folks want to do. We're always looking for improvement ideas for interactivity. Please, the poll that Nicole's posting, give us more ideas. We really do listen to them and execute on. The last one is, I mentioned it in the chat, but Danielle, there's a great article about Danielle and her insights in our hub. I love when our members share their insights into their world, and she talks about actually her progression to her current job. So thanks, Danielle, for giving us that. And Marcus, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Linda, thank you for setting this up, starting back in 2008, and we have came a long way. For people that's new on here, the Dulye Leadership Experience started back in 2008, and it was exclusive for Syracuse undergrads transitioning into the workforce. Going back to 2016, she made a transition where she brought it to the Berkshires. You see a lot of people from the Berkshires on this call today. This shows her impact that she's made on this community, as well as just people that really believe in the DLE's mission and want to help it grow. 2020, we had COVID, which threw everyone in the world into a world spin, unpredictable. You don't know if you got to wear a mask, wear gloves, stay inside, go outside. But we transitioned to transition virtually, and we had some learning pains, but it's been awesome because we've been able to connect with people that potentially wouldn't never been able to connect with if we just had all in-person events. Someone like Jonathan, someone like Maple, Cheryl, you're new. This is awesome to see you. I see someone on there, Eric Linger. That's awesome to have you on. Welcome to the DLE community. And last thing about feedback, think of we see ourselves as children, and you are our parents. We take all your feedback because we want to be the best version that we can be. So we don't take it personal. We don't get hurt. We're just trying to make a great product for you to come back and you feel comfortable to refer your colleagues and friends to the DLE. So last question is, by show of hands, did you learn something of value that can potentially help you combat a toxic culture, or for you to identify a toxic culture? I see some head shaking. So that's awesome. So we appreciate that. We're not experts. We're not toxic culture consultants. But the goal of the culture chat is to learn from your peers. Be in a relaxed environment where you can have these discussions that you potentially can't have in your own firm because you're scared that someone might send it back to your manager or your team lead. You can discuss those things with us, and If we have advice or experiences, we hope that it helps you out. Now that it's 12:58, everyone, you can unmute. We can talk about anything you want in the Cooper fashion. Cooper, really, he really loves good news and politics. So, Cheryl.
Yes, Cheryl.
I do, sorry. I do want to, I mean, John asked a question earlier in the chat that I don't know if it was addressed, but it was about, like, what if you try to address the toxic environment and they ignore you? And I lived that in my first job in Boston, second job out of college, about 8 years ago. Still in finance. I was more on the custodial side then. And essentially, like, the client that we had was difficult. At that time, it was 2012. So in 2012, 2013, so there were a lot of new regulations coming out from the financial crises. So the new Dodd-Frank regulations, which imposed a lot of different checks and balances on our business and the way we transact and send money out and wires out and everything, domestically and abroad. I say that because this example is specific to that. The situation I found myself in was that the client was trying to find exceptions to the law in this case. This was law, this was Dodd-Frank law, to accommodate their clients in sending money abroad without having the appropriate checks and balances. And if since I was the one responsible to actually executing that transaction and it came back to me, I facilitated in breaking the law. They wanted me to find some wiggle room within the law to be able to do it with the checks and balances, and I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. I addressed it with the team. I addressed it with my boss. I addressed it with their boss and their boss's boss. It went up pretty high up the chain that it came to like the third step down from the CEO that I had to knock on the door, and I just, and that's just my personality. I like to just get things head on, but I was ignored, and I refused to do it. I refused to do the transaction unless legal and compliance cleared it and identifying me from the, like not taking me away from the responsibility of it. Like, yeah, I'll push the button, but if it's come back to me, then you have to get my back essentially. I had to do it to keep my job, and at that point it was 2013, hard to find a job, so I needed to keep a job, so I was kind of in a tough spot there. But I knew right away when I was getting ignored that I had to leave. I'm addressing it, and I'm getting ignored. This is, and that was the first time I actually had to face myself with setting boundaries. And I reached out to my network here, actually my alumni network from Syracuse. I was transferred to them already, and I asked somebody for advice that way. I asked my parents for advice. I asked my brothers, because like, how do I do this? And it was a scary time. It was a scary time for me, because what if I didn't do it and I left my job? Now I have barely any savings. I have student loans. I still do, but back then they were higher. Like, it was scary. I had to walk away, John, to answer directly your question. I walked away, and I did it in when I walked away, I did not make that my reason to not burn a bridge because of the situation. Like, what if I have to come back to this job later on because of job situations? But I had to, I told them that when I quit the job, I told them that, hey, great to work here. I think, it's time for us to separate, for us to grow in our own right. I did it really professionally. Thank God for the advice I got from my parents and the network I had here. But it's just a big exercise in setting boundaries, a big exercise in kind of finding your self-worth too. It's like, how much are you willing to put yourself online out there? And, and it's a two-way street. Well, your employer or the client come and support you if you are in trouble. And in that case, I felt not supported and ignored. And it was a hard decision to make. And I was kind of labeled at the company for a little bit as the one that jumped ship. And you know what? Like, yeah, it kind of hurt my self-esteem. I was like, I tried my best, but at one point, like, I had to do the right thing. Stick to your morals and leave. And And sure enough, a few months later, everybody started leaving for the same reason. I was like, hey, look at that. Like, I'm not the only one. So you kind of self-indicated there. But it's, once you see something and you try to address it and they ignore you, like, raise awareness first. And if not, just, you have to take care of you. Like, I'm not trying to be individualistic. Again, I'm a team builder and team leader, but you always have to think about yourself. You can provide to the table and what you're getting back from it. It's an exercise in giving to get, but if you're not getting anything, then stop giving. So that's my response to that, John. And I thought it compelled to say that because I remember the feeling of not, scared. If I don't do this, I'm gonna get laid off, and I need a job. What happens now? So, anyways, thank you for letting me say that. Yep.
Hey, Kaylee, I think you have a good story to tell because you just started a new job and you did a lot of homework trying to figure out if this was the right move for you. So ways that you were trying to assess the culture. I mean, you knew the owner was a good guy, but you didn't really know a lot about the culture. So what did you do in your research?
Yeah, so I knew the owner fairly well from my childhood. So I knew him, his family, and kind of his personal details, but I didn't know really anything about the company that he ran. So I did a lot of research in the community. I talked to Linda a little bit about, because she's familiar with him in the company, and I reached out to actually some of the people who worked here. So I knew one of the employees here from the retreat last year. We had met, so I talked to him in great deal about the company, and actually they've been recognized a lot in the news just for what they do and the level at which they do it. So I did a lot of research into those articles about, the innovative practices that they've been doing. And, it's other companies that are writing about them. It's not themselves putting it on their website. It's great to go onto a company's website and read the About Me section, but, that's what they want to say about themselves. So it's nice to do a deeper dive into the media. So they actually, there was a lot of information about just past articles dating back to 98 that I kind of read through about their practices and what they were doing. And I actually also knew several people in the community who work with them, so they contract them out as their managed IT providers, and I talked to the client side of it as well, just to see what their views were on the company. So it's definitely good to get outside input. It's nice, and then try and ask questions about the culture. I know I had talked to the owner, I think 3 times before the position was actually offered to me, outside of the interview process. We just were having conversations, and I really tried to focus those conversations around the company and their culture and how they go about their business rather than just what I'll be doing and what they do as a company, but really dive deeper than that. So that helped a lot.
So everybody probably has asked the question, but if you use the chat, what do you think is one of the best ways or most effective ways to ask the question? So describe your culture. I mean, if anybody's got a good way of posing it, that makes them have to get very creative and specific on it. Put it in the chat. What are 3 adjectives you'd use to describe your culture? It's different than say how you're going to make me have to think of the 3 things that come to mind. That's going to put a little bit of a crunch to me if I can go on and tell you about 10. Hey, Weston.
I don't know really a creative. I don't know really a creative way to ask that question. But really, I was comfortable with the owner in this situation. It wasn't a stranger to me, so I was comfortable just saying, what
what is your employee morale like? What kind of things do you do like to develop your employees? And I really tailored it towards like what they invest in, like professional and personal development, because that's really important to me. And we went off from that.
I think it's a lot of times it's really, you can't use words to describe it. It's your gut feeling. So my suggestion is the more people you talk to, the better data point that give you the gut feeling that you can get. So that's my.
So Maple, I mean, now we got.
I do have a question. Yeah.
We can't just like run into people in the hallway. So are you reaching out virtually, right? I mean, you're reaching out, setting up phone calls versus doing it through an email. What are you recommending?
Well, it's like if you are really in the late process of the interviewing, deciding, you can pretty much request anything, right? You have to remember, if they decide they're pretty much going to hire you, you are the one having the leverage. So you should request to be able to speak to different people and as many comments. If it's early in the process, I would just recommend you using LinkedIn. And yeah. So I do have a question. Do you, does it really worth it to push back on the toxic culture as a kind of junior level if you're not like an owner? Because I mean, I know it's a little difficult to say, but not everybody has a privilege to leave their job, their current job. But yeah, does it really worth it? Like, I mean, I'm not a confrontational person, so it's I think it's yeah, turnover will show their way, or it just, yeah, what's your guys' thoughts on it?
I think insecurity and like not having, like if you don't have a backup plan or you don't have something to hold you over until you find another job, I think that's a huge barrier to people speaking up against toxic culture. I think a lot of people are quiet when they're in lower positions because they rely on that paycheck or that place to provide for them, and they will not speak out or push back against it because of that, for sure.
I mean, the process to do that, I mean, you have to, it's exhausting. I mean, like, I know that the way I told the story was like, oh, symbiosis, you have to just leave and whatever. It's easier said than done. Like, when I was telling my last story, the feeling there was always exhaustion, anxiety, nerves, and you kind of have to, trust yourself in being resilient. And honestly, that was the first time I ever was faced with that in the corporate environment. And I learned how resilient I was. I learned how to be more, direct with people. And I guess the word is confrontational for sure, maybe, And when I say that, I don't mean in a negative way, like, and you just have to address the issue and face it. But it was hard, and that is a barrier. Kaylee's right. It was a barrier, and I didn't leave the company until I had another job, and I had to stick with that job for 4 months after I tried to address it with the old job. Try to address it, and people looking at me weirdly, like, oh, he's the guy that complained about stuff. Like, well, I had a reason to complain. Like if I'm wrong, sure, but I don't think I was in that case, and it was annoying. And luckily I had a mom, specifically my mom. She raised me to just like ignore and move on. And in this case, it worked. Sometimes it doesn't work, but in this case, it did. And it's at home I used to just go home and I won't lie, I get a little emotional, whether it's angry or frustrated, or whether I cry a little bit, even though, it's what men don't cry. Oh, they do. I did. It's frustrating. It's annoying, but it's a practice in resiliency. If you feel that, the gut feeling that I was talking about earlier, if you feel like you need to do it and you have that barrier to move, like Kaylee mentioned, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough, but anything worth doing is gonna be tough. You know, it's in the end, it's up to what you want to get out of your life. You know, if you're willing to deal with it and kind of stay there, sure. You know, but you have to be honest with yourself, negotiate with yourself, and be like, hey, this is the bottom line. If I'm staying, it's gonna remain toxic. I'm doing this. It might not change. It might change. You don't know. Are you willing to wait it out to see if it changes? Those are tough questions to ask. You know, it's easy to ask, hard to answer.
Yeah.
Those are my 2 cents.
Were you in a?
My question is, no job will be perfect. Yeah.
Of course not. No, of course not. And you know, and that's I think that's when, according to your comfort level, you want to have the opportunity to try to make your job perfect. I mean, like anything in life, there's gonna be a bad and a good. You know, not to be too black and white about it, but like with everything in life, if you want to grow, there'll be some pain with it. And having a bad job brings you pain that makes you grow into a better version of yourself. You know, jobs aren't perfect. That's the way that they are, and that's honestly, I think it's kind of beautiful because it teaches you about yourself. You kind of want to find a silver lining here and there, and you know, I always, whenever I say stories or advice, I twist it into a very positive note because that's just my personality. But I will tell you how it is straight up. If it sucks, it sucks. How do we find the best way of doing it? So, you know, of moving forward. Can you sit in this position for, you know, 5, 6 months, a year? You know, but if you can. So it's a process, and just rely on your friends. Rely on if you have friends like that. If not, find those friends, like, or this community. I'm sure, not to speak for Linda, but I think I feel what this community shares stuff, and I can rely on you guys now. You know, there are people out there, and I believe humans are good and will help people out there in these situations, and not just this one, but many other stuff. So I absolutely think, you know, there are things for you out there to rely on and get good resources and advice.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier back when you're in a lower position, it's kind of hard to push back against certain things, and then especially if you're right out of college, you don't know what's a good or bad culture. Unless it's something just outrageous, you're just trying to figure out how I get promoted and do my job well. And my last job was a pretty tough experience for me. And I expressed like, hey, this is not the right way. I want to get communicated. And they adjust managers, just teams. They wouldn't give me the manager that gave me what I would say made my most improvement and made me the most comfortable at the firm for I don't know what reason. And it got to a point. I mean, Khalid, I wish I could have stayed 4 to 5 months before I had a new job before I left. But I was in a position where I felt like I was going to make a visceral reaction to my manager that can have a detriment to my licenses and just who I was as a person. And if you're ever in that situation, I say deal with the financial consequences later. Don't mess up your career for one person. And I made that decision to take a step back, but it worked out now.
Yeah, I think one thing I often see with just my experience and things like that, nobody ever really wants to come into a new organization or a company and be the one to cause rifts. And so a lot of times we'll probably take more than we want. From my own personal experience, I've oftentimes, when that does happen, because for the longest time I would just be the one that would sit back and I would take it in, and then I'd become resentful, and I found that it would just affect my overall job duties, right? I wasn't performing to my standard that I had set for myself, or I would do things, you know, halfway done and things weren't getting done the way they needed to, or I was constantly making mistakes. When I left the prison and I moved into social work, you know, I went from making a large amount of money and being financially secure to, you know, barely making, you know, $12.50 an hour trying to support 3 kids. And so it was hard and it was overwhelming and there was stress, but when I went to work, I actually enjoyed what I did. And so many oftentimes, I think one of the best pieces of advice is, because even before I quit, I had a supervisor that was amazing, and he would always tell me, he's like, you're not meant for this job. Like, there's better things you could do. And I would always tell him, I can't leave this job. This job, like, this is my job. This is what I'm good at. Like, I know what I'm doing. I make good money here. And so I think when you're challenged with adversity and you're able to persevere that, no matter how uncomfortable it is, you will come out on the other side of that. It will be uncomfortable and it will be hard within that moment. But I always encourage, I encourage my team all the time to speak up. And one thing I teach my patients is, like, there's no easy way to have a difficult conversation. Oftentimes we'll think, I'll wait for the right time, or there's never going to be a right time for me to speak up on something that I don't agree with or I don't see eye to eye with. It's just, you're going to have that. Maybe it will be received well, maybe it won't be. But the more you hold that in, the more you don't discuss it, your feelings and your thoughts and your perspective, the more that's going to just self-implode you, and then you'll make mistakes, and then essentially you look like the one that doesn't know what the heck they're doing, and then you're caught in a compromised situation because, oftentimes we don't speak up and we just develop that resentment, and then we have to deal with the consequences of not speaking our mind within a respectful way, right? We don't want to blow up and make ourselves look like fools, but coming across with that assertive communication, letting them know, right? Like, if you're being micromanaged, if you do have a supervisor or a coworker that have poor boundaries and have unrealistic expectations, laying that down. The way I operate as a director within the company is, I've taken everybody. I hate to be micromanaged, but my boss pushes on me, and I know she does it from a loving and respectful way because she wants to see me successful. And so oftentimes I have to kind of put myself in check, even if I'm like, I don't need my hand held through this. It's doing this as a supportive role. And so sometimes we have to take our personal biases out of that as well, because we don't like to be micromanaged, or we think we know maybe somebody's looking at us incompetent, because oftentimes I will do that. My boss will be like, I need you to do this and this, and then you need to email me when it's done correctly. And I'm like, I'm not a child. Like, I'm not a child. I don't need you to follow up on me. But it's doing it for the accountability aspect. And I found that because she challenges me in that way, I rise to the occasion, and I often excel higher than what she expected, because she has that demand for me in a respectful way. And so I think there's a fine balance within, finding that toxic workplace and just being challenged as an employee within the company.
Yeah, so that's what I'm afraid of when we're talking about this kind of stuff. Like, what's the definition of toxic culture? Like, I don't want to use a toxic culture as an excuse to when people face challenges and when people have to deal with different personalities and of your supervisor. So we have to be like clear, is a toxic culture really every day you wake up, you like didn't want to go to work? Is that toxic enough, or every day you think about quitting a job? So that's,
I think for me, toxic culture is like, once you get to the point where like you've tried to alter your behavior, like you've tried to do as much as you could to control the situation, and it's still not pleasant for you. Like, I think you really have to take like personal accountability into it first, because when you think of a situation, like, you can only control what you're putting into it. You can't control anybody else's reaction to the situation. So if you've tried everything you could to better the situation and it's still not changing or not, at least starting to get better for you, that's when it can be considered toxic. And obviously there's different levels of how toxic, but at least that's what I think.
Yeah, I definitely think it's different for honestly everybody. And I think it gets to the point where if you can't comfortably come into work anymore, that's toxic enough to leave. In my scenario, there was a whole slew of things that my boss was doing. And I mean, I tried to deal with them as well as I could. I tried either talking to him or ignoring them or just going about them the best I could, because I couldn't change him. But then it got to the point where I would start getting anxiety the minute he walked in. I would have panic attacks. My employees would be calling me, because I was the manager at the time, like complaining about things. And I was like, this isn't worth, it's detrimental to my own personal health. And I was like, that's when it was the ending point for me. And that's when I sat down with my boss and I was like, hey, I basically had like a bulleted list. Like, these are my issue items right now. How are you going to deal with them? And I was going based off that. And he sat back with his arms crossed, didn't really care, shrugged off everything. And I was like, well, there's my answer. And I left.
And that's a good point.
Early. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you, Maeve. I just wanted to add to Kaylee's and Kirsten's point. Like, you know, it's the toxic component. It's a sliding scale for everybody. You know, and you are gonna have to deal with personalities. And I know that Linda's programming for DLE has dealt with how to have talk conversations before, and I'm sure many topics that will help with that. Like, if people are different, that's how life is. But it comes to a point, it's like, yeah, sometimes dealing with a bad person gives you like a bad feeling for a day, 2 days maybe. You know, if you're like me, maybe a week, because, you know, I tend to kind of internalize that. But if it's permanent, if it's always, that's when like you start evaluating. If, you know, like Jonathan said, is it me? Like, check yourself. Is it me? Is it the company? Like, you have to be very self-aware. And it's hard to be, but, you know, just the way I do it, sit back, look and listen, you know, and internally and externally, and kind of go from there, like, you know. And Kirsten's right, like that was her answer, and sucks that was the answer. I'm sorry, and hopefully you're in a better place now. I think you are, because I saw you in chat earlier, but you know, you tried, and they lost you.